Welcome to the On-Premise IT Podcast, the only show that dares to be both on topic or on premise, and sometimes on location or on premises. Each time we meet, we bring together a group of industry experts to discuss a single idea. On today's episode, the premise is focusing on the overall IT industry, which has heard a lot of doom and gloom lately, but frankly, we feel like maybe it's not doing quite so bad. But before we get into that, let's meet who's on the panel today.
Hi, I'm Andy Banta. You can find me on Twitter at Andy Banta. Been in the tech industry for quite a long time and have some ideas on what's going on it.
Hello, my name is Nico Stein. I work in a financial institution currently. I've also been in IT for many years. You can find me on Twitter at Nico A. Stein or on my blog at nicostein.com.
Hi, I'm Geoff Burke. I've been working in IT for more than 20 years, and you can find me at Cloud Restore since I work in data protection.
And I'm Stephen Foskett, organizer of Tech Field Day and publisher of Gestalt IT. And also I've got the gray hairs to prove it. So we're all old, long-term veterans here. And I think that's really where it kind of comes, where this whole idea comes to. Because frankly, if people are following the stock market, well, these tech companies aren't looking so great. And if you're following the news of layoffs, especially at the FANG or whatever they're calling them this week, the big, online provider, cloudy kind of companies, man, you would think it was the apocalypse. But, on the ground and in the data centers and so on, it's maybe not quite so bad. Now, I don't want to minimize anybody's hardship because those people that were laid off have a hard time and it's not fun. And you feel like you did something wrong and you feel like it's your fault. First off, it's probably not your fault. In fact, it's almost certainly a decision that has nothing to do with you or your work or anything. It's probably something where, somebody decided to save some bucks by doing something stupid and laid you off. And I'm sorry that you're going through that. But hopefully what's happening is that people are able to find something new and maybe something better fairly quickly, because we're hearing that as well from people. We're seeing a lot of people say, hey, I got laid off, I'm open to work. And then we'll see somebody say, hey, I got this new thing. Isn't that cool? Is that what you guys are seeing too? Who wants to start? Jeff, you want to start?
Yeah, that's exactly kind of what I've seen in the sense that people get laid off. And you're right, it's a very traumatic experience because especially some of the people I've seen have been in companies for 10, 15 years. And there's also a feeling that it's like a disloyalty from the company. Here you gave all this time and all this work and you're just out the next day, especially some of the ways it was done. We won't name any names. However, on the bright side, I very quickly have seen in my LinkedIn, starting a new position and a little exploding, fireworks and stuff. So it's a very strange situation. On the one hand, you're right, there's this doom and gloom. On the other hand, there are jobs out there.
Yeah, I kind of see the same thing. What I've heard of mostly are some large companies who've decided that they don't want to focus on certain parts of the industry anymore and have just shed the people associated with that. There have been some that have been across the board, we're just going to try to shrink the companies. But in a lot of cases, it's been, we're going to get rid of this function of the company. And if you work on that function in the company, you're gone. And again, just like Jeff said, the people that I've heard of that have run into this have had prospects almost the next day that they can go talk to and a good idea of where they can go. So I don't think that I don't think the tech industry has really changed a whole lot. I think that, there have been other times where big companies have dumped a lot of people and people have moved on. I still think overall there's probably a net shortage of technology workers. There's more things to be done in technology than there are people to do it.
Yeah, I would have to agree. The way I see it during COVID times, it was an overhiring from many companies. It was almost an overstocking from graphics card the same way. And it was a natural course correction. All the people, if you look at the statistics, we're almost at the level we were in before COVID hit in terms of employment. So I do agree it's not the doom and gloom it makes out to be. Of course, it sounds very good for the news if company A lays off 20,000 people. If you put it in perspective, they hired 50,000 people in the past 3 years. Not naming any names. What we're probably going to talk about later and what's really said is how some companies conduct the layoffs. That it was almost, No, not naming names, but there was no decency in the way it was done. That's really hurtful. So my heart definitely goes out to everyone who got laid off. And even if you get a job 3 weeks later, it's still a traumatic experience. You have to settle, and especially what we mentioned, the people who worked at companies for many years, right? Not the people who leave after 1 year at another job, but they've been there from the project beginning, 5, 8 years, and now you just made obsolete. So that was pretty tough. But yeah, a lot of them have found other jobs than from what I've seen on my LinkedIn feed and talked to. Some are a lot happier than they were, and they didn't even know it before. So that's a little positive.
There have been an awful lot of people who haven't really admitted this, but when COVID hit and when the work from home environment started, productivity at a lot of tech companies really did drop. So they probably were hiring more people in an effort to make up the lost productivity. It's just the change in the way people worked caused an awful lot of productivity loss.
Yeah, and of course the jobs were different as well, and the technologies. So I mean, I think a lot of us heard about, for example, Zoom, who of course really like hired a bunch of people and leaned into it. But even companies, in my opinion, like Facebook and Google and Amazon, they hired a lot of people during the pandemic because I think they were seeing a lot of growth, a lot of use of their platforms and stuff. But of course, some of that didn't pan out, or some of that came out in a different way. There was different hiring, different purchasing decisions. We've heard about Apple. They were an interesting case because they did not hire nearly as many people. I mean, they hired a bunch of people, but they didn't hire and grow as much as like Meta, for example, just across town. So they haven't had to lay people off at all, or at least not as many. And as you said, I think a lot of the companies have handled it really poorly. They handled hiring poorly, and then they handled laying people off pretty poorly. But what I want to kind of transition into next is a discussion of sort of what is the trickle down effect for the IT industry. So, whether it's Google and Amazon, and I've heard have decided to extend the life of their servers by another year instead of replacing stuff. Whether it's companies that over-purchased and are now kind of pulling back on purchases of IT hardware. A lot of the industry has kind of evolved to basically feed the hyperscaler machine. And so many of these companies are really, like, that's their biggest single market. And if the hyperscalers stumble, like they did after the pandemic, then it can have bang-on effects about companies like household name IT companies in storage and networking and servers and commodity components and that sort of thing. Are you seeing that as well? Like, is there an overall trend of the hyperscalers no longer buying, and then that's hurting the rest of the industry?
I mean, I haven't seen that personally. One thing I want to kind of point out, which I think is important, is that there's a lot of, in my opinion, knee-jerk reaction. I mean, we've just been through a 3-year pandemic. The expectation was that when the pandemic ends, people aren't going to be on Facebook, they're going to be Google, they're going to be out walking around, they're going to be in restaurants or whatever. So obviously, for a time period, there's going to be a behavioral change in purchasing, which obviously would affect the Facebooks and whatnot. And that's maybe what explains why we see some areas of IT being hit and others not, because people are shifting their purchasing, shifting to balancing out. I think we'll really see what's happening in a year or two once we're totally back. Well, if we are totally back to normal in our behavioral, our IT behavior. But I haven't personally seen a massive trickle effect as opposed to 2008, which was a massive economic disaster. I saw all over the customers leaving left, right, and center of all sorts of different industries. So it's nothing like that at all.
Yeah, I haven't seen that either yet. I think it's also, especially for IT, the past 3 years, it was so hard to get hardware, right? Like the network equipment, even from my own experience, I had to wait for Cisco gear for a year. And partly now it's starting to normalize a bit more, but there's still some supply chain management issues. To Jeff's point, right, I think we're still not baseline. We're still coming out of it. We have not reached the new normal, whatever the new normal might be. It's not going to be exactly like it was 3 years ago, but we're still too fresh out of it to see how it really pans out. And plus, I think companies really don't know what to do because it's supposed to be, well, it's not supposed to be, but everything looks like a recession. And then you look at the unemployment numbers and that is everything but a recession. So companies really trying to focus on being ready for whatever it might come. We might not be in a recession. Right now, the indication, like in 2008, it was a picture perfect, unfortunately, but you saw it coming. It hit right with everything that the waves on the cycles before that was happening. And this right now, the numbers don't match up. It really almost doesn't make sense. The unemployment should be much higher, but it is not. And then the question is what analysts still haven't figured out, all the people who retired before and during COVID from the workforce, where are they now? They're not, there's like this big void all of a sudden. Maybe they all went to an island. I don't know, but I think we need to wait to have it normal out and define what the new normal will be.
I did want to follow up on Stephen's comment about household name computing companies. I think part of what we're seeing is that the hyperscalers and the large industries don't need the household name components anymore. The new innovations are coming from different companies, not from the big IBMs and Cisco's and those types of companies. They're coming from places that, like we'll be talking about over the coming week, the CXL industry, the high performance bus architectures that are coming along, and those aren't necessarily getting driven by the big compute companies that we were used to in the past.
But they are being driven by some of them. I mean, so CXL, for example, was invented by Intel, and Intel has certainly been hurting in terms of sales right now. But again, it's hard to attribute Intel's sales challenges to falling off hyperscaler purchases when that's still, a huge market for them. And frankly, they've been a little slow to deliver on their server platforms and things like that. So, I mean, I think there are maybe other confounding factors here. And as you said, I think that there is a lot of innovation happening. Let's talk about that. So, I mean, you mentioned CXL. We did a season of utilizing CXL weekly podcast here where we talked about that technology. If you're not familiar with it, the idea is that you can use PCI Express, the same bus that you attach peripherals inside a server, and you can use that same technology, at least in the next generation, version 4, version 5, version 6, to attach basically everything, including memory, and create sort of fabrics of PCI Express that allow you to build big, weird, hyperscale, rack level, or hyperconverged, rack level, disaggregated. Give us some words. You can build these strange computers over a CXL fabric that have memory and a separate chassis and I/O and storage and all this kind of stuff. It's a very, very cool technology. It's a very, very cool field. We're going to be hearing from the CXL consortium at Tech Field Day, as well as a company, Memverge, that is specializing in what they call big memory systems, which is another pretty exciting area of tech right now, where basically you can build a server with as much memory as you want, thanks to CXL, and you can then do really cool things with that memory with a technology like Memverge, like snapshots and moving memory around and saving it and restoring it and stuff like that. Very, very neat stuff. And I don't see them being affected by the pullback from the hyperscalers, because I think that they were really leaning into new technology and new ideas. And that's maybe a good direction to go for companies, right?
Yeah, I agree with you there. I did want to comment on Intel running into problems. Intel is the streamhead for so many different types of technology. So yes, they certainly are involved in CXL, but if you're not selling as many compute boxes, you're not going to be selling as many, high dollar processors. You're not going to be selling, 1K processors that many times, and that's probably partially where Intel's problems are coming from. But I do agree, things like Memverge and various other technologies that go out and are taking advantage of this stuff in new ways are the ones that are actually going to be at the forefront, or the leading edge going forward.
And for the benefit of the big players laying people off, there's all this talent available right now. So the startups, they have really good access to, top engineers with a huge amount and wealth of experience, as well as not so much the industry itself. I've heard of manufacturing processings and factories, right? They're scooping up IT talent now, not to put on the conveyor belt, but to help them optimize their processes and even their technology, so they don't depend on a third party to anymore. And they figured out, if I have this in-house and I can not necessarily save money, but I have this talent and I can achieve much more than depending on a service provider to do this for me. So I see a lot of startups really benefiting from the availability right now, as well as completely outside of the industry, which is, I think, is pretty amazing. I haven't seen that in the past like this.
Yeah, and again, what you say is right. And the other thing to keep in mind is, of course, we're in an industry which is forever evolving and changing. And so, how much of this is pandemic? How much of this is, new technologies? As all of you know, IT keeps us young as we're always studying, right? So,
Yeah, definitely. It's really really interesting to see what's coming down the line. Another area. So we mentioned CXL and big memory. Another area that's definitely seeing a lot of investment and interest is orchestration, and I don't know what to call it, but kind of debugging complex systems. Essentially, if you've got a distributed workforce, a distributed platform that's using cloud and data center and edge and everything, there's a lot of investment and a lot of interest and a lot of exciting ideas going on out there to basically get this stuff under control, whether it's determining sort of root cause analysis of network performance issues, whether it's orchestrating container placement, whether it's cost optimization. There's a lot of really interesting stuff out there in sort of figuring out how to deal with these big dispersed systems, right?
yeah, I'll say to that, for instance, because I've been studying a lot of Kubernetes recently. It's getting so big that is becoming the challenge. How to make it was always a challenge, but now it's becoming an uber challenge in the sense that how do you watch over all these things, these thousands and thousands of containers, and that goes now even to pieces of hardware, edge, and so the monitoring and the analysis of the monitoring and the reaction to whatever happens is becoming a whole specialty in itself, a whole profession. So that's a very good point.
Yeah, and I do think that a big part of this is that there's lots of different technologies that are coming together and people are using them, integrating them together in lots of different ways. So that's where some of the orchestration and debugging and analysis type things have to come in, where you have, instead of like a tool or two tools from two different vendors, you now have 100 different tools from, on 50 different types of hardware, and you need to be able to have some coherent view of this, and you need to have some way of actually building whatever process you're trying to do on top of these. So I think the number of moving pieces has changed over the past decade at least as well.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, everything's gotten so much more complicated. I always say for end users, things might look easier, right? But to just point with Kubernetes and Docker Swarm, whatnot, yeah, it looks awesome, right? For end user, I just consume this service. On the back end, it's gotten really complicated. And when something doesn't work, it is difficult to pinpoint which of the many moving pieces are causing us right now. So I think, yes, monitoring tool is key. But also what I experience, like, you get bombarded with the noise, right? It's great if I have all the logs, but it's completely useless if I get 50 alerts per minute. I will not look at any of these. And what I'm still not I haven't found it yet. Maybe next week at Tech Field Day I will see it. Is a tool that has a really good noise filter, and in addition has a good remediation function, right? It's awesome if the tool shows me like, okay, we have a network latency in New York because of this. Great. Can you fix it? That would be my question, right? So I kind of almost want to simplify it, that I just need to click a button. I'm completely fine. I work in IT, but I'm completely fine just clicking a button and fixes it, versus me getting a packet sniffer out and looking on the edge, where are the drop packets? So that's something a lot of people I know looking for. Haven't quite found it yet, but there's hope.
Yeah, and that's one of the things so we've got Kentic presenting. I've always been impressed by them and their technology, and I'm really glad that they're, they've been very successful in managed service providers, and I think that they're starting to apply that technology to enterprises, because enterprises are getting that big, they're getting that complicated now, and so I think that there's a lot of opportunity there for them. Another area, of course, as anyone in the IT industry knows, is if you're having client problems, it's DHCP. If you're having application problems, it's DNS. That has become a greater challenge as well. This whole self-provisioning, self-configuring IT systems. If only they actually worked. So that's another one of the new companies we're going to hear from is Men and Mice, who are trying to crack that nut. What do you guys think of that?
I've seen Men and Mice. I'm a bit familiar with their product, and I think it has great potential because we don't even think about DHCP and DNS anymore, right? You would think we have evolved past this. Why are we talking about DNS? Well, because A, it's always DNS no matter what, and it's deep down, it's a pretty complicated system. It's a bit more than just, a text file and matching this. There's a lot of things that go on, and because it appears simple, it's not necessarily simple. And when it fails glamorously, right? Hello, Office 365 and Azure and AWS and all of you. So there's definitely still a lot of issues with this system. Maybe we're time for a complete overhaul. I mean, most of IT infrastructure depends on ancient systems that were not designed for this scale or for this complexity. So maybe it's time for an overhaul, but yeah, we're still running, even on my work, DNS, DHCP problems still occur from time to time. And it's really, it's, when you find it out, it's like, really? We're talking about this anymore?
And also, if companies keep laying off, they're going to need these kind of systems because they won't have the human being to do it. And I can see Nico's probably done what I've done once, is turn on a Linux server by accident, which had its DHCP, and it just started to wipe out the Microsoft DHCP. I don't know if you've done that before. So yeah, any help in that department, it's great.
Well, I think one of the things that we run into here is that when we've taken something that's very complex and we make it simple, we then want to take that new simple thing and build more complexity on top of it. So we end up with layers upon layers of complexity where, we have something very complex providing what we think is a very simple thing, and we want to build more complexity on top of it. We end up with a very deep stack of complex things, which end up presenting a simple thing at the top. And when something goes wrong in that complex things, it's very hard to find. It's or when you actually want to change a small portion of it somewhere, it becomes very difficult to change something in the middle of that very complex thing.
So you're talking about over-engineering sometimes.
I'm not talking about over-engineering. I'm talking about the idea that, it's exactly what technology is supposed to do. It's supposed to take something that's very difficult and present it in a very simple way to the user. The problem is that the issues that we run into are the users always want to build more complexity on top of what they think is a simple thing. That it's the way technology is supposed to work, but we end up with a cascading level of technology of complex things.
It's a battle between flexibility and simplicity, I think. And so what happens always is you get simple systems, but then you want to sculpt it for your environment. And so you make it more complicated. I've done that. So
yeah, one of the things we heard at Edgefield Day, and I kind of want to put this out there for you guys to think about what you think as well. One of the things we heard at Edgefield Day was basically, I don't know how to articulate it, but it seems to me like you can't half automate things. You can't because it just makes it complex. You either have to take your hands off the wheel and let the car drive itself, or put your hands on the wheel and drive the car. It's like I see a lot of IT solutions that are trying to be like a co-pilot, and that's great, but only if you're flying. You know what I mean? It's like only if you're actually being involved in it. And I see a lot of systems fail and get overly complicated when you don't allow automation to automate, and you're fighting it all the time. And to me, I think that's one of those kind of, again, I don't know how to articulate it, but I feel like that's one of those lessons that's creeping into IT for me.
So if you try to half automate things, you're trying to do like job preservation. You're trying to say, okay, I'm going to automate half my job and I'm going to do the other half myself, so I actually have some work to do. I think if you actually approach automation properly, you should be approaching it with it. You should be automating yourself out of a job. You should be automating things to the point where you are no longer needed and you can go on and move on to something else.
I think it maybe also just depends on the industry too, because I just recently had a situation where I was talking about data protection, and this is a good example of where you might not want to fully automate the process because you want to be able to have some choice, especially during disaster recovery. So in other words, you automate initial restores to a certain point, but you don't want to let the operator be totally removed, because what if in a disaster when all sorts of choices have to be made, you want a different workload to come up first and it wasn't in the plan. So I think you're right. We try to automate so out of a job. On the other hand, too, it's very specific to what field you're working in, I think, what industry and what you're doing.
Yeah, I agree with Geoff on this one. It really depends on it to not give the final control out. And it's also a liability issue, I'm sure, right? If you work in healthcare and you automate processes, if something goes wrong, and most likely will, I'm all for automation, but I think we're not there that you can remove the human factor out of automation. Not fully yet.
And it seems to me, I mean, I think where I was trying to go with this, and I think that just to kind of get us back on topic here of the tech recession, it seems to me that this is the area that a lot of innovation is happening, whether it's in networking or security or edge or orchestration in Kubernetes or cloud or anything. It's all about kind of dancing this line of automation. And I'm actually glad, Nico, that you brought in the whole out of a job kind of aspect of it, because, I think there was a lot of fear that, speaking of a tech recession, I think there was a lot of fear that these tools, this, business process automation tools and so on, would basically eliminate jobs. And I think that's really not happened. I think instead what we've seen is maybe some changes to what the jobs are. The same with AI. I really don't think AI is going to, eliminate the need for network engineers and so on. I think that, whether it's hyperscalers hiring too many people during the pandemic, whether it's tech companies leaning too far into supplying hyperscalers, whether it's old school companies that are not investing in marketing, all these things I think are overreactions by companies, and then they panic and they cut and they announce all this stuff. And in reality, what happens is over the long term, technology advances and the business of IT advances. Is that what you guys are seeing? I guess one last chance for y'all to jump in here before we close. Is that what you're seeing?
Yeah, so I think that's part of what we're seeing. I do think that an awful lot of things are just realignment of what's going on in individual businesses as well. But I don't think this has changed in technology a whole lot ever, other than we just see a lot of companies laying people off right now. But there's always this kind of roll forward in technology where you've done this thing, so then you move on to the next thing and perfect that. And I think that's where an awful lot of what we're calling the recession is actually happening right now.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, technology will move forward with or without us, or with or without the companies, right? So the natural reaction for a company if they're uncertain about it is to lay people off, because that's the quickest and has the most short-term return. It's going to be interesting to see the companies that are not following this, that were a bit wise and didn't overhire and kind of kept a steady hand in the past and now still have a steady hand. I think they will do better, definitely in the mid run. In the short term, yeah, other companies are going to tune their numbers and looking great, but to the point of other big companies who let a lot of engineers go. Without engineers, you might have a great product, but clearly automation is not there to let it run with 10 people. So yeah, good for other companies to pick up those engineers. And that's all I have to say about that.
Yeah, and I think the other important thing to look at here is when we're talking about layoffs and talking about this is what's the main question for the actual person, the systems engineer or the employee? Well, I think in IT, the main question is always evolution. You can't stay put. There'll be layoffs and there'll be job hirings, but what you can't do is remain a certified Windows 2000 administrator. You have to keep moving forward, and that's what I think to focus on more importantly. And the good news is there's a lot of education, free education that's out on the internet now. I've seen that when I joined IT, there was nothing free. I don't really remember. Now, literally, you could get a whole IT education or a training for free almost by yourself. So that's the positive side of things to focus on. I don't think jobs are going to go away. I think they're going to change. And so we just have to make sure that we change in the right direction with them.
Yeah, and I think too that let's just say that the tech recession is real and people are really losing their jobs, and that's really bad. But at the same time, a lot of that was the over-rotation of a few companies and the pullbacks from a few companies. And I think that those companies have handled it really poorly. But maybe, there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and that's that they've now pulled back a lot. They've laid off a bunch of people. And now those people are going to go out and, make 1,000 flowers bloom, right? They're going to go out there and they're going to go and work for startups. They're going to get jobs in industry, and they're going to, basically rebuild the industry to where it was, because overall the economy, the global economy, is pretty healthy. Obviously there are some challenges, but I think that overall, we're actually looking pretty good. And I think that, next year at this time, we might be looking at another roaring tech economy, and maybe a healthier one where, everybody isn't working for Meta and trying to find a project in AR, and instead is, working for, I don't know, an insurance company or whatever, and trying to actually, I was going to say actually do work. Do insurance companies do work? No offense, insurance
companies. They produce
companies,
ads.
But maybe they're trying to, actually, be productive in a different way. So it seems to me like, as we said at the beginning, yes, there's a tech recession, but maybe it's not quite so bad as it looks, because there's a lot of other cool things happening. There's a lot of startups. There's a lot of new innovation, and there's a lot of opportunity outside Silicon Valley. So thank you guys for joining us for this episode, and also at Tech Field Day. I'm looking forward to spending some time with you and hearing about these companies. And if you're interested in what's going on, just go to techfieldday.com and you can learn more about that. Before we go, where can listeners continue this conversation and connect with you, Andy?
You can find me on Twitter at Andy Banta. And actually, I just started my own blog, andybanta.substack.com. There's one article up there. There should be another one very shortly.
And for me, you can find me on Twitter at Nico A. Stein, and on my blog, nicostein.com. You can also check out Gestalt IT webpage. There's a guest blog post or guest post from me about some cool technology. So go check it out.
For me, at Cloud Restore on Twitter. I'm also on Mastodon. I haven't memorized my handle yet. Unfortunately, I haven't evolved. Also, I'm the Kubernetes Corner leader on the Veeam Community Hub, so I post a lot there as well. And my blog is called geoffburke.blog.com. Really original.
Well, we'll include links to these things in the show notes. And as for me, you'll find me on the social media sites as S. Foskett. I am on Twitter still. I am on Mastodon as well, the techfieldday.net Mastodon server. You'll find S. Foskett. And of course, you'll find me on these weekly podcasts, as well as our weekly Gestalt IT News Rundown. So if you enjoyed this discussion, please do subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Give us a rating and review. You'll find us in all your favorite podcast applications. You'll also find us on YouTube. We do video of these podcasts as well. Just go to YouTube/Gestalt IT video, and you can see video recordings. You can see what we look like in real life. This podcast is brought to you by GestaltIT.com, your home for IT coverage from across the enterprise. For show notes and more episodes, go to GestaltIT.com/podcast. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.